So I want to introduce myself and then I'll be introducing our panel as well. My name is Lindia Hayden. I work in the Office for Diversity and Inclusion, and I am also a co-lead to this employee resource group, the Black Women Leaders Connect group. We are joined together to support each other and nurture and guide Black women within our organization as well as within our communities. And today's event is called Defining, Establishing, and Protecting Mental Health, Taking Care of Ourselves. This is actually part two. We had part one last year. It was a private event and it was so good, so well received. They asked for another part and we wanted to branch it out and have everybody else share in this important discussion. So we welcome you today. And before we get started, I want to give a special thank you to my colleague, Oliva Goddard. She's been helping me coordinate this event, and hopefully it's been a good experience for her so that she can help do others as well. I want to be able to introduce our panelists to you and our moderator, and then we're going to have a little word cloud to see how you're feeling today. For today, we have Reverend Dr. Zarina Costello. She is in the Center for Spirituality and Health. She's a director of community engagement as well for the health system. We have Dr. Yasmin Hurd. She's a professor and director of Addiction in the Addiction Institute of Mount Sinai Behavioral Health System. We have Dr. Shilper Tafik. She's an assistant professor and the chief division of psychology for the health system, as well as a vice chair for faculty development. And our moderator today, you might be familiar with her, Dr. Misha Frimpong. She's an assistant professor with the Department of Ophthalmology and Pediatrics and Medical Education. She's also a vice chair of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and an associate program director with that. So welcome to our esteemed moderator and panelists. We're really excited for today's event. And before we get started with Misha, Dr. Frimpong talking to them, sorry, slip of the tongue there. We want to share a word cloud because we understand that there's a lot of different people that come to these events and we're all curious and feeling different things. And we want to take a pulse on how you're feeling today. So I'm going to share my screen. And on the screen, it has a QR code. And it'll pop up now. Can you see my screen? Okay, good. And it has a QR code. And if you prefer to just go in on a browser and type in slido.com, you can actually put those numbers in there. And we just want you to tell us in 1 to 2 words how you're feeling right now. So please feel free to do that.
Yes, please, guys, because as Lindia said, we wanted to begin with this check-in, right? So how are you really? And, we wanted to hear in 1 to 2 words, are you feeling calm or at peace, stressed, tired, excited, anxious? How are you really? Stressed, okay, beat down, annoyed, exhausted. As you guys who know these clouds, these word clouds, that stress means a lot of people feel stressed, exhausted.
Yes. The bigger the word is used, the more pronounced it's going to be on the screen.
Overwhelmed. Yeah, I think that's why this discussion is so important. So thank you so much for sharing. We're hoping today's discussion provides some
Still
direction.
coming in, Misha.
Sorry, they're still coming in. All right. Overwhelmed is another big whoa. It just blew up. Anxious, stressed.
Still more people typing too.
All right. Well, maybe we can come back and revisit it towards the end, how it all populated.
Okay.
But I think we're just eager to jump right in. And we're hoping that this discussion and gives us some insight and clarity so that when asked this question in the future, more likely than not, we respond with things like, that reflect our inner calm and well-being more times than not. So before we delve into the minds and glean the expertise of our panelists, I'd like to ground the discussion with a quote from a piece written by Daniel T. Gilbert. He's a Harvard-based social psychologist. And the quote goes like this. He wrote, "Big pains often evoke remedies that little pains do not. Broken legs hurt so much they cry out to be fixed, whereas knees are often allowed to go on hurting for a lifetime." So we all know extreme mental illness when we see it, right? The disheveled person roaming the street, talking to himself or shouting at passersby. But what are our inner tricky that may be invisible to others or maybe even to ourselves that perhaps are conspirators to our mental unhealthiness? So what's the right balance when it comes to understanding what mental health is? How do we take a pulse on our own mental healthiness, and what can we do about it? So our first question is directed, and I apologize for all the noise in the background. Our first question is directed at each of our panelists. First, Dr. Tawfiq, then Reverend Dr. Costello, and Dr. Hurt. So the first question is, how do each of you think about or define mental health?
So I'll get started with that. I think about just the standard definition of mental health that is usually floating around, and it really refers to a state of mental well-being, shows up as people being able to cope with stress in life, realizing your full potential, whether it's at work and family, at play, learning well, working well, and contributing to their community. That definition is, I think, very widely used, but I think inherent in it is a potential trigger for stress, because if there are elements in your life that, whether it be work or in your abilities or in your community, that are sources of some of your stress, it can create a feeling of, oh gosh, I'm not well because I'm not contributing to my community, but that might not actually be the goal. So I think really striking a place of mental health has to do with balancing what's happening for you inside and what's happening on the outside, and understanding that that's not going to look the same for everybody. You may have your own individualized version of what feels good and feels right for your being. And that's of you, who you are on the inside, and how that blends with your outside.
Thank you for that, Reverend Dr. Costello. How do you think about mental health, or how do you define mental health?
Well, in agreement, certainly with what was just said, but it is part of a spectrum: mental health, emotional wellness, and it's a whole spectrum. It's not just like on one end or the other. And as we look at it in terms of a lot of the work I do in the community, it's really having a balance between mind, body, and spirit. For those who believe that their being encompasses some type of spirit. There's no one definition for that. So it's how people feel. And then our ability to be connected. If the better connected we are to positive organizations, people, activities, we have more of a balance. And so we can gauge for ourselves what area, mind, body, or spirit, may be sort of out of alignment with what we believe or what we're doing or our work from time to time, and how that's impacting us. So it's really a constant assessment of ourselves to see how aligned all of those things I mentioned are with one another.
Yeah, I really appreciate the comments from both of you, because it's just like when we think about our physical health, right? We come up with a regimen, right? We're going to exercise, we're going to eat a certain way, we're going to do our annual screenings and our cancer screenings, right? The same kind of sort of customized approach based on what's going on in your life and your age and what you need. We also should think about in the same way as our mental health, right? And coming up with a mental health regimen or plan for protecting and take caring of it. Dr. Hurd?
I think that everything that's been said, I completely agree on, because for me, the word that came to mind really when I define mental health is homeostasis. And everybody used that word, balance. It's so critical. And the ability to cope. Life will always throw things at us. It doesn't matter where you are in your life. It's how you're able to cope with that really assesses to me, how where you are on that spectrum of mental health in terms of, emotional, psychological, social, and, as the Reverend Dr. Costello mentioned, also for those in terms of, spirituality. But it is, I think sometimes we think of mental health as just one thing, but it's so integrated in every single aspect of our life. And how do you balance all those things? When one of those things are off, to me, that's an aspect of mental health being potentially, out of balance. So I do agree in terms of balance, homeostasis, and the ability to cope with your different aspects of your life.
Right. And then also, I mean, with the word cloud showing so many of us are feeling stressed or overwhelmed or burnt out, yeah, maybe we are managing, maybe we are getting everything done. It still doesn't feel good, right? And so figuring out that, like you said, the inner how you're feeling and how to manage all of that is so critical. Because even if we're all managing and we're getting everything we need to get done, doesn't mean that we're doing well, right? Okay, so the second question I have is directed at Dr. Tawfiq. It's how can one assess one's mental healthiness? And what do you think are the top 3 barriers or obstacles to mental health? And if Reverend Dr. Costello or Dr. Hurd want to chime in on this one too, please feel free. We'd love to hear from everyone.
Sure. I would actually like to build on what has already been said and agree that there is no one formula, but I do think there are several areas of our functioning and of our life that we need to pay attention to, and recognizing that they all have importance. So, there are these 8 or 9 dimensions that one can think about when assessing one's well-being and mental health. Emotional functioning, social, spiritual, vocational, intellectual, financial, environmental. And I also want to add to that family, physical as well, as you mentioned, Dr. Frempong. So with, physical, it makes sense, right? We all know what to look for. I feel good, I feel bad, I have pains, I'm sick, I'm not sick, I'm capable, all of those things. But I think it's really important to recognize that that's going to intersect with all of those other dimensions of you, because your physical being doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so your physical being is influenced by your emotional being, by your social, by your environment. So if we can think about it in that way and not kind of section off, well, oh, I did my workout today, but now I'm exhausted and I have no time to think about the things I need to do. Well, then maybe that wasn't the focus you needed. Maybe we need to readjust your focus on physical and not separate it out. Intellectual, it's really not about work necessarily. It could be about work, but it's also just your own kind of intellectual stimulation, curiosity. How do you keep a curiosity alive, a desire to learn, expanding your knowledge in a variety of areas? I do often find that people will pigeonhole that into like, is this for my work? If it's not, then I'm not going to look for intellectual stimulation. But it does really foster our ability to connect with others, recognize different things about ourselves and about the world around us. And so that's a really important one to focus on. Emotional, we've been talking about, identifying feelings, your values and attitudes. How do these all intersect with each other? Can you identify your feelings so that it doesn't have to control you, but you can have a little bit more control over what it does and how you utilize these feelings? And also not having this idea of I need to push feelings away or not have them or bury them. If you're having them, they mean something and they're an indicator to you about something. So you want to listen to it and pay attention and allow it, give it validation that I'm feeling this way because of X, Y, and Z. We saw stressed and overwhelmingly in the cloud. That's telling us something. So even though we may be getting our things done, something's very off. And maybe we want to zero in on that stress for today and say, I need to make adjustments because this is going to throw off my other dimensions. I can speak to a few of the others, which I think are self-explanatory, and I also want to leave some time for the others to weigh in as well, because I'm sure you have some great insights also.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I want to kind of raise the issue of trauma, emotional trauma, trauma, unresolved trauma, complex trauma, and patterns that sometimes we are repeating, unhealthy patterns and ways of functioning that we may not be aware of just because we were raised in a particular way, in a particular family, and we learned how to operate and live our lives according to what we were taught by our families. And sometimes we just never get to the point of questioning that. Is this the most effective and the most healthy way for me to handle my stress or handle my anxiety? So sometimes it's helpful to be reflective of that. And of course, I always recommend, if necessary, to get some help from a mental health provider, someone who's trained in those areas. Some of us have suffered abuse within our family context, or we may have, just generational things that have been going on. And we need to break those patterns. And sometimes we need to learn the tools in order to be able to do that. But I think the first step is acknowledging that particular situations evoke, as Dr. Taufik mentioned, evoke certain emotions, and really being able to kind of zone in on how those emotions are coming up for us.
Yeah, I love that idea of really acknowledging the emotion, maybe even writing it down and writing down what's creating that situation, right? What's making us feel overwhelmed or stressed, and looking at it in the face, and then maybe coming up with a way of sort of managing so that it's not taking over our lives, but it's just giving it that space, right? And some of us, like you're saying, Reverend Dr. Costello, never grew up in a space or a culture that even allowed for that, right? We just sort of push through and make do and make it work, which is not working for us most of the time. Professor Hurd?
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more. I mean, I think these barriers really comes down a lot to the communities that we're from, the families that we're from, so that we believe that we must toughen things out, that, you're weak if you ask for help. And I definitely think, as Dr. Taufik mentioned, acknowledgement is the first step, but it's a huge barrier. It takes a while to sometimes do that. So being able to put it to, pen to paper, really write it out. And I think that that's one of the things. We live in such sometimes toxic environments, either at work or or at home, and we then become numb, and that numbness prevents us from understanding that we do have a challenge. And so I think that also, when you are isolated and feel isolated, that makes it also a challenge, and that barrier, to also getting help.
Yeah, I think that's
if I could just add to that, with the barriers, there are the standard barriers of stigma, limited resources, cost of resources, and all of that. But I think the one I really want to drive home is dovetailing on what Dr. Hurd just said, and that is in the being present in the moment. I think we do ourselves in when we're not willing to be present in the moment. And the indication for us that we're not present is we're caught up in fear, or we're caught up in anxiety and worry about what's to come. So are we lost in the future that hasn't happened yet? Or are we stuck in the past that's kind of holding us back? If we can do the practice of recognizing, here's where I am right now, we will be able to better acknowledge what we've been through and where we want to go. But it takes a practice to do that, because it's very scary to say, this is how I'm feeling right now. I have to just accept this and tolerate it. We're running away from it, either backwards or forwards. But that's never going to allow us to actually resolve or address what it is that's happening for us right now. So all of those other barriers that we're talking about, many of them, most of them are external to us, and we don't have control over them. What we do have control over is us, what happens inside, and where my mind is going to go. I am the only one that can control that. So that's where I want to put my efforts.
And also speaking to the trauma and the numbness, if all you've ever felt is stress or worry or, fear, you don't know that there's another way. This
Right.
is your norm. So it would be amazing for people to be able to sort of think and experience another way. Did I lose someone?
No, I think just
No.
we
Okay.
around.
All right. So should the next question that I have for all of you are, what
Can
are
I just, before
Oh,
we
yeah.
move on, can I just say
Oh,
one
please.
thing?
Go ahead.
I think, yeah. Another barrier in some situations are people who are not experiencing a healthy theology in their lives. By that I mean, if you're part of a faith system that says you don't need extra help, you don't need to maybe see a therapist, you can do it on your own. All you have to do is pray. That type of theology is very damaging to us. And if we're in those contexts where a faith leader, a faith organization, or any type of system that we may be a part of is saying that you can just do it all on your own, you can, as somebody mentioned, push through. All you have to do is pray, that is going to resolve your mental health or emotional wellness issues. So I want to make that a specific point, because sometimes in our communities we do hear people saying that, oh, my pastor or my faith leader said all I have to do is pray, and this is going to go away. Also, if you're in an abusive situation, which just does cause a lot of depression, anxiety, and fear, and if your faith leader is telling you to stay in there because the Bible says, or some sacred text says that you're supposed to put up with that, that is definitely a negative theology that kind of try to get out of.
Absolutely. Dr. Hurd?
For the last question again, or for the new one? Because I think, in regard to, you were going to start asking about, you had started to ask about, I'll let you finish before I answer.
Okay, so the third question is about resources, right? So we know there's plenty of things in Mount Sinai, but other things in the community and faith-based tools and resources for establishing, improving, and maintaining mental health. So can you guys share your perspective on those?
Yeah, I mean, I can start for me, I think indeed Sinai does have all these resources, and I'm going to let Reverend Dr. Costello, really provide resources in regard to, faith-based support. I do think it's interesting, again, this aspect of a lot of times you feel alone and you don't know who to reach out to, the stigma that Dr. Taufik mentioned. So you're afraid to go to someone, even afraid to go to perhaps someone at Mount Sinai, even though there are a lot of resources here. So sometimes the first step is even online. I'm not saying that all these online programs and so on are valid, not at all, but they're enough for you to actually start the search, to start to see that, there are even apps that are actually been quote unquote approved, have very good reputations. And I think, again, in terms of not being alone, realizing that there is help out there, for me, I think it's important for people to look online, really start to see, do I show these same number of features that people say that that looks like, oh, I might have a mental health challenge. Can I talk to someone online, or just start looking? So I really think that that's sometimes one of the first steps for people who don't, the stigma of it, or may not be part of faith-based program, in their communities, or don't have support from friends and family in terms of helping them to take the first step towards. I really do think that people need to get mental health support from those who have the knowledge and experience. Your friends and family may be good, but that's not enough. Things.
Interestingly enough, there was an article recently about loneliness in the New York Times. Of course, we all know our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, has talked extensively about loneliness and its impact on our overall physical and mental health. The article on loneliness, I mean, there's been many. There was one on the lonely brain and how it contributes to dementia. But there was something I read recently that I thought was so poignant, and it was that loneliness is not only about isolation, and that loneliness can also stem from a disconnect. This is what the article says: a disconnect between what you want or expect from your relationships and what those relationships are providing. That was like mind-blowing for me, because if you think, we have so many relationships, right? Reverend Dr. Costello, you talked about relationship maybe with your spiritual leader who says, do this or do that, and this is what's going to happen. That's not serving you well, right? So that relationship is not good for you. Or even our relationship with our work, right? Where, we come into it thinking these are our responsibilities, this is what we're going to do, but then we're being asked to do things that are completely out of the scope of what the caring or whatever it is, and so when that breach in that relationship happens, that's another form of loneliness, or another manifestation of loneliness, that I thought was something that we should all sort of marinate on and think about how it applies in our own lives.
Yeah, that is often referred to as moral injury. And especially during COVID, that issue emerged a lot amongst not only amongst staff in various healthcare systems, because it was so difficult to care for the patients in the the beginning of the pandemic, and knowing what to do. And people, as you said, were being asked to do certain things, and they weren't sure if that was in line with their professional practice. So moral injury is just what you were talking about. It is being in a situation, and this really came out a lot from studying what happened with the Vietnam war veterans, how during that war, there was a lot of that going on in terms of taking orders to do certain things that went against their moral core. And so from there, PTSD developed, these feelings of guilt, the moral injury, and really understanding how that can impact us, not only professionally, but in our personal lives. And it's something that is worth looking into, investigating, and not pushing it under the rug, so to speak.
Yeah, and I would like to just add to this that it's important that we can make the distinction between being lonely and being alone. Being alone is not necessarily a bad thing. And on some level, we do want to learn how to be alone with ourselves, be with myself, be comfortable with me. That can be a goal. to aim for. Not entirely, you don't want to be disconnected from other people, but this is something that is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness has a different impact on us. It really does coincide more with disconnectedness and an isolation that may not be healthy. And so it's, again, this balance of, when am I lonely? When am I alone? What can feel good for me? What can nourish me and care for me? And what's going to harm me?
So someone who's thinking about, okay, you guys, you tapped on my stress, you tapped on the fact that I'm overwhelmed. What's step one? What's something that any of us can sort of think about approaching to setting things righter?
Well, I think really getting to know yourself and finding things where you can have enjoyment, and it's different for everybody, because we're so much into a work culture. There's this woman, I can't remember her name, but she has this ministry called the NAP ministry, and it's about looking at historically the value of work, and how, because of the condition of human beings having been brought over into slavery in this part of the world and other parts of the world, that working was what their value was. They had to work to produce a product. And so we follow in a lot of that, work, like Rihanna says, we just keep on working and don't take the time out to do some things that we enjoy. So whether that is something in the arts that you may like, it may be getting back to nature, spending time with nature, which can really be invigorating and help bring that balance. Meditation, that works for some people, not everyone. Learning how to do some breathing exercises, and that can be done throughout the day. No one even has to know that you're doing breathing exercises, just to kind of like calm yourself down. But really connecting to the things where you find enjoyment, and not ignoring that, and not being so much into this work culture, even though there's a lot of demands being made of us, that we don't take the time out, to listen to music, to spend time, in a park, or any type of nature situation, going to the beach. That's very healing and calming for me. I love being by the water. I love feeling the motion of the waves flowing in and out. That for me, I find that very calming, relaxing, and centering.
It's so interesting. I read a book recently, and it was written by a death doula, right? We know about birthing doulas, but this is a woman, her career is helping people who are at the end of life and helping their families cope and maintain, and cope with all the things that have to be done around a life ending. And one of the things she talks about is sort of living your life with the end in mind, right? Because we always hear people at the very end, they never say they wish they spent more time at work, right? They never wish that they just got that last project done. They talk about wanting to spend more time with their families, right? Or wanting to do that thing that was undone, that was so important in their life. So maybe that's another thing to consider. She asks her patients, or the people that she's helping, to see themselves on their deathbed, and how would they describe the person that they're seeing, right? And what life was lived. And then she also asks, is there anything in your life that's still undone, right? So thinking about those things as we have breath and energy and wherewithal, do it now and not live with regret.
I think also it's important with all of these things that we might want to try, is that we don't wait until we're stressed, or we don't wait until we're at that breaking point to try them out, and instead be really intentional about bringing this into your everyday, building it into your day-to-day routine, even when you think, I don't need this right now. If you make it a habit, you'll be much more likely to be able to prevent the heightened stress but also it won't feel as strange to you when you do need it and you have to start incorporating it. And it really is like a way to preventively address your well-being.
Right. Just like with our physical health, right? We don't wait for you to have a stroke
Right.
to address your blood pressure or your diabetes or the same. So in the same vein, you know, taking an assessment of your own mental healthiness, where you are on the spectrum and what maybe needs to be done to push you on the more positive side of that, I think is so critical and is what we're trying to get at, I think, today.
And I agree. So, Dr. Tawfiq, I was going to talk about setting habits also before you need them, because the same thing. I mean, we all in our society, coming back to the physical, once you get over a certain weight and your doctor is saying, yes, you know, you need to go on a diet. Yes, you need to start exercising, but you knew way before that. So the question is that how do we catch ourselves before then? And I'm going to tell you, I'm horrible. So I'm not even, you know, the good messenger. Can't say that I have great self-care. I think it's easier for me to care for others than to really put it towards myself. So I do think that it's also important to get people in your life who care about you to really help you have self-care. Because for some of us, it's easier, to, like I said, to help others than to turn the mirror around and really look at it. So, but today, you know, Dr. Frimpong, I think, Frimpong, sorry, I want to say Misha, and I want to say, then again.
You just say Misha because we're all friends.
Exactly. That's why it's like, yeah. I mean, I do think, how do we help ourselves and help people here? Perhaps every month. It doesn't have to be more, you know, just have 5 questions. And perhaps we can build those questions and send out, what if did you check these things this month? And just like, you know, a checkup with a car, perhaps once a month you have another additional 2 things to add. And I think just being mindful, you know, Shilpa mentioned, just being mindful, it will force even me to do that. It will force even you to do that. And I think that's what are some concrete things that we can take away that's not a big, heavy lift. And then we start to make that a pattern, and then we can identify things faster.
In preparing for our panel today, I did the whole deep dive. So I've found some really interesting articles, and Lindia and our team will post it on the Black Women Leaders Connection website, and in addition to the book that I mentioned, if anybody's interested in seeing that. But there was an article, again, in the New York Times, and it was titled, how are you really, right? And they ask you to, just like you're saying, Dr. Hurd, to ask yourself certain questions, right? So one of them is about your mood. So how would you describe how you feel most days? Another one is about your self-talk, right? Like in your inner monologue, are you more self-critical or more self-compassionate? Ask about your physical health, how you're physically feeling. Ask about your relationships. Do you feel that you have strong relationships with family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers? Meaning and purpose, all the things that we've been discussing today. But I think the key is really sitting down with yourself, like you're saying, as a habit. Quarterly, monthly, whatever your interval needs to be, and truly face those questions and ask yourself, you know, and be honest with those responses to yourself, right? So that leads us into my question for you guys about your self-care practices. What are some of them that you found to be most meaningful in your life?
Well, for me, as I mentioned, being able to go to the beach or some body of water where it's calm, preferably in a warm climate. But yeah, that travel, I find travel to be, and I know you like that too as well. That travel um, expands your horizons, and mentally you get to see things that you don't normally see in your environment. So I think that can be helpful. And travel doesn't mean you have to take this big trip and spend a lot of money. In New York, there's a lot of opportunities to go to places that we don't frequent because we're on such a busy schedule of going back and forth to work. But taking advantage, and especially this time of the year when there's so many activities going on in the arts and free concerts and you know, programs in museums if you like that sort of thing. I also like poetry and spoken word, so I really missed it during the pandemic when we were shut down, and a lot of those venues are opening up. Um, so I like attending those type of events. I don't play an instrument, but I love music, and some of the work that I do, and we ask people in our healthcare system how they sort of de-stress, and a lot of people play an instrument, and they picked it up again during the pandemic as a source of strength, a source of relaxation. So I think, you know, for me, also being a part of other folks that are doing positive things, and you know, my faith community is part of that. It's not all, because I don't depend on only one person or one group of people to be connected with. I like being connected to a variety of people within my own historical context, my culture and my family. And you know, it's challenging. The question of being isolated, and again, not being alone, but that aloneness is something we sometimes have to lean into and getting to know ourselves. But being isolated is something that we need to help each other with. And a lot of times, you know, we don't check on each other enough. I try to remember to check on, you know, certain folks that I know. And sometimes people do check on me, and that helps me with my own self-care. A group like this is very important. You know, we have in many instances shared goals, shared work, shared philosophies, and just knowing that we're connected in that way, for me is very healthy.
So one other, you made me think about a resource when you talked about travel, and you talked about travel and the beach. So I'm on vacation this week, and until last night, I was in the Cayman Islands, and it was mind-blowingly amazing. But I'm so bad at blocking off time. But a friend of mine and I booked this in March. Right. So we had an anchor, and it was that there's a happiness course, the free happiness course on Coursera. It's done through Yale University. And one of the things they talk about in this happiness course is how we derive so much joy from the anticipation of the thing, right? So that was just amazing to just, my friend and I would send each other text messages like, you know, 1 more month, 2 more weeks, you know, and we got more than the enjoyment of the actual vacation, but all the fantasizing and planning and ruminating positively about what was to come also gave us joy. And then we also took tons of pictures. So now today we've been sending pictures back and forth, like, remember this? You know, so yeah, the beach is also my happy place. But I think the point is, you know, planning and getting that enjoyment even before you do it. And so there is this course on Coursera free through Yale called the Happiness Course, and it talks about things like this that can help you improve your mood or your enjoyment or your happiness.
I think for me, it's been really putting a practice of mindfulness at the center of everything I do. And it's the longer I've been doing it, the more impactful it's been, that it's now at a point where, like, at times I feel like it's a superpower almost, and how things can kind of come and go. And it's okay. I can still be where I am and still feel grounded. In terms of a practicality, you know, taking your vacation planning and maybe making it more like every day. One of the most effective things I've done is partnered with a colleague and friend at work, and we agreed together to hold each other accountable. Actually, there's 3 of us. We have lunch on the schedule, blocked out, can't be removed, once a week, where the 3 of us will go and just check in with each other. And all those things that we start to drift away from, we've agreed we'll bring ourselves back, and we'll support each other in this way, and very intentionally doing it during the workday. at the early part of the week. So it really kind of helps set the tone. One, it drags me in on Monday. And two, it really kind of reminds us we don't have to just work without finding each other here. And it sets the tone for like, yeah, I got your back, you got mine, and let's do this together while not forgetting ourselves.
Amazing. Should we open up the questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lindia or Oliva, can you tell us here? Can I see the Q&A questions? I don't see any questions in the Q&A at the moment. Are there questions in the chat? Let's see. All right, there are lots of comments.
Yeah, I I opened up a can of worms asking people to share what their self-care habits are.
Which is great.
Yeah, let's
wonderful.
share.
Which is great. And
Yeah.
I think everybody has a very similar, I do, nature is definitely there. I love the beach too. For me, I think that's also my happy place. I love painting. Art is really central to my soul. Sadly, I need to carve out that time. So I think Shilpa's, more daily regimen is much better in terms of, self-care. Every weekend, every Saturday, I should say, I have friends. I used to live in Sweden, and we had this American Women's Club, and every Saturday, whoever makes it, we still meet at 3 o'clock on Zoom before COVID, and then COVID saved a lot of us. But every Saturday we meet. Doesn't matter the time difference where everybody might be in, and if we can make it in, so it does make a difference that checking in once a week. So that definitely is key. But I will tell you, Les, if some questions aren't there yet, the New York City actually does have a lot of things in the summer. And I was passing by Lincoln Center one night and I heard disco music and people were dancing. I'm like, oh my God. I went in and I just started dancing. And it just freed my soul and it was so much fun. And so these are things that I think, free concerts, all of this music, I think is really, really great.
Yeah, there's one thing that actually came in a little bit earlier. It was from Jason Rose when Dr. Hurd, you had mentioned about even going online to do some research, not taking it with a grain of salt, but his comment was that it can be overwhelming and can lead to even more fear. So I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned it. It's really critical, how you go through these search engines. But Misha, I think that there are some online sites that are there some of those that you had passed along, because we could also pass along some that are much more I think validated. And I think that those are the things. But it was more about getting that first step with stigma, because sometimes people are afraid to reach out to Sinai Employee Health, Sinai Wellness Center. And so it's really important to you can start the search, but indeed it can be overwhelming. But there are a number of online platforms that are I think are good to go. So I can, all of us can go together and we could put a list and send to the group
Yes.
put on the website.
Good.
Amazing. Yeah. Even psychology today, right? You can find resources and providers that have nothing to do with Sinai. And somewhere in the middle of the pandemic, I started seeing a therapist and, actually, and I changed at some point because the first one may not be the right one, right? And so you got to take it easy and just don't give up on it if the first person you find is not necessarily, you're not connecting or they don't understand or you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And also, what does that really mean? That's another thing, to get somewhere, right? Sometimes it's a long process and it's not overnight. The things that brought you to the place where you are didn't happen overnight, right? So they're not going to go away by magic. Any other questions? People are sharing some interesting things. Somebody said the Lincoln Center dance party is awesome. Zumba dancing. There's a lot of physical activity, right? I know for me, if I don't exercise, I don't feel as good, right? So that physical movement, that boost of dopamine endogenously is like huge as well. Somebody said taking a nap with her dog Rio and traveling with her dear daughter Siobhan is heaven for her. A lot of traveling, which is probably like getting out of our everyday, right? And all the things that are actually stressing us out.
But it is
Just
important to try to find the daily things as well as these travel things. So I think, to Dr. Taufik's point, I love to travel as well and love to be on the beach. But it's like, how can we start developing day-to-day practices that's I think is going to be the key.
Yeah, the other thing is just like when it comes to losing weight or getting more fit, I think a lot of times we know what the things are that we need to do, right? It's just the actual doing and the consistency of it. Like I'm sure, Dr. Tawfiq, when you started your meditation practice, it took work to be able to be disciplined about it regularly and quiet your mind and have it center you and all of that. But you got to a place now where you can probably do it standing up in the supermarket or
well, yeah, that's just it. It's like the whole point of putting in that effort in the beginning was how can I do this in other places, just in my day to day. And it is work. It takes work to learn anything, right? We're all in the jobs that we're in because we took some very focused effort and attention to learn a thing. So this is another thing to learn. And it comes with countless rewards. It's also important to do these things, recognizing it's never going to be perfect. There is no such thing as doing it perfectly. So you'll get distracted or you'll fall off and then you'll pick it back up. All of that is okay. That's part of the process of learning anything that we want to learn.
Right.
Yeah, I think that kind of answers the one question that's in the queue. I've been trying to deal with stress and my positive health journey. However, I keep falling off because of kids, family daily issues. Any tips on how to stay on track or reduce stress would be helpful.
I would say also thinking back to those dimensions that we talked about earlier, the dimensions of well-being. Those will cover your day-to-day activities in many ways. And so if you can sit yourself down with somebody, a trusted loved one, a therapist, a counselor, and kind of go through and say, what is a daily activity that I do in each of these areas that I could tweak just a little bit to make it a bit of a practice for me to focus on myself and self-care, well-being, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it. And if you can weave it in that way to things that you're already doing, it's less of a burden to have to take care of yourself by saying, now I got to add yet another practice to all the other things I do. So as an example, I love movies and good TV shows. Absolutely. It's like nurturing. It's great for me when I feel really defended and guarded and I don't want to deal with what's happening inside, but I can watch somebody else going through something. Now, all of a sudden I'm connecting emotionally, I'm releasing emotionally, but it's in the safety and the confines of my home when I want to do it. So that's one thing. My son loves making movies and watching shows. So I want to spend time with him. We want to have fun and we want to laugh. So that's something we'll do together in a way. So now I'm like doing several things at the same time that also infuses me taking care of myself.
Right. I'll tell you.
I wanted to agree with you 100%. I've done quite a bit of work with families and, using a kind of family systems approach. And sometimes, families come in because they're just overwhelmed. The kids have all these activities, they're working. And when I say to them, well, why are the kids doing so many activities? It's like a light bulb goes off. And sometimes teaching the kids that they don't have to do all of those activities, you can remove one or two and they could still have, have fun growing up. It really adds to the life of the family, the lifestyle of the family positively. So rethinking all of these things that you're doing within a family, even how you prepare meals, engaging the children, teaching them to help you in the kitchen or whatever. I know when I was a child, my grandmother and my mother, they let me do things. I mean, maybe I was messing it up, but they didn't tell me, but they let me, touch the vegetables or wash the vegetables or little things. We have to engage our children in these practices that we're trying to do for ourselves so that they learn to do better than what we're doing. And, it helps us and it helps them as well.
And maybe
I
even
was
baby
gonna say-
steps, right? Like first thing in the morning,
Yeah.
do some stretching or 5 minutes of meditation or gratitude journaling or at the end of the night, just carving out, just 5 minutes or 10 minutes for yourself every day. I think it's the consistency that you'll see the improvement and not necessarily the length of time that you're doing any one activity. So that would be one suggestion.
I know
I
that
think
know
that
what
we're
I
getting
government
miss.
close.
also.
We're getting
Sorry.
close to the time, but there's something important showed up in the chat. Suggestions on helping a mother with her mental health, facing many challenges, health issues, marriage, caring for others, and her environment. And she wants to know what she can do to support her. And in terms of the question about books, we are going to have a full list of resources that we will send to everybody. But if someone can address that one question before we wrap up.
So the question says, I need some suggestions on helping my mom's mental health. She's facing so many challenges, health issues, marriage, caring for others and her environment. What can I do to support her?
My first question would be, have you asked her what she needs from you? Because I would imagine, is no way that you'd be able to take care of all of these things for her. And so maybe setting realistic goals and expectations for yourself and for her, and even asking her, how can I be of help to you? If those things feel realistic and doable to you, then you can engage in them. And if they aren't, maybe helping her even problem solve. Okay, let's figure out where we can get you assistance for this. Is it a therapist or a counselor? Is it someone, I don't know if there's legal involved. Is it figuring out how do you find care services? If it's things in her environment, is it practically helping her make a list or calling a landlord, or, what are just the practicalities that you might be able to help with? Without knowing more about the situation, those are just some generals that I can say. But first and foremost, even asking, because sometimes, I come from a background in a family where the expectation is I will just carry the burden and the weight, and I should just figure it out, and I should be able to read everybody's minds and meet their needs. So my limit setting is, now I'm actually going to get very specific and say, what do you need from me? How can I be helpful? And then go from there, rather than taking it all on myself.
Thank you, guys.
Sometimes it could be, let me just say, sometimes it could be as simple as helping them get somebody to come and clean the house.
Yeah.
I mean, because sometimes that becomes an overwhelming task,
Yes.
especially if you have a family. So having someone come in every once in a while, it doesn't have to be every week, that can relieve some burden. So thinking this through and really taking some practical steps, I think is with the person who's asking for the help can really go a long way.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Lindia. Thank you, Aliva. Hopefully this was an initial inoculation or second inoculation to those of you who were at our first event, to thinking about your mental health and thinking about it just like you do your physical health, asking yourself critical questions, and then figuring out steps, baby steps, big leaps, whatever it is for you to get started and stay committed. Thank you so much.